Imagine waiting in a 10-hour line just to put 20 liters of gas in your car. You are holding this paper voucher because the cash in your wallet is essentially useless.
Hmm.
Or picture your landlord doubling your rent tomorrow simply because a tourist from London makes 3 times your salary and wants to work from your apartment for a month. Today, you are going to see exactly what happens when abstract economic numbers slam into hard physical walls. We are looking at distinct economic pressures moving in very different directions across the globe today.
You have a tech giant realizing it has to outsource his brain power because its own servers are maxed out, and a $4.7 billion bridge finally opening to unclog an international bottleneck.
Plus, a Spanish vacation hotspot, quite literally buckling under its own record-breaking success, and a Russian-occupied peninsula running completely dry of fuel. Welcome to Financial Candy. Our goal today is to translate these complex market and geopolitical shifts into plain human language. We are going to explore the weird incentives, the consumer impacts, and the underlying mechanisms driving these stories. And to help connect the dots and make sense of the numbers, I have the ultimate guide sitting right across from me.
The underlying reality connecting these distinct scenarios is the invisible cost of friction. Economics, at its core, is really just the study of how human beings manage friction and allocate scarce resources. When you look at the daily news, you're usually seeing the stress fractures of systems operating at maximum capacity.
Whether that friction is caused by a lack of housing or a severed supply line, or even the sheer computational power required to run the next generation of artificial intelligence.
The results always alter the landscape for the end consumer.
Let's start with the stress fractures happening right now on the beaches of the Mediterranean. Spain is experiencing an influx of people that is shattering historical records. Last year in 2025, they hit 97 million tourists. Now they are projecting 100 million visitors for this year, 2026, which cements their status as the top global destination. Just in April of this year, they saw a record 9.1 million international visitors in a single month.
The geopolitical engine driving this is fascinating, though. People are actively avoiding the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean. We are talking about places like Dubai, Turkey, and Cyprus, largely due to the ongoing U.S.-Israeli conflict with Iran. Spain has basically defaulted into becoming the ultimate safe haven vacation spot.
That pivot in global travel patterns acts as a massive capital injection into the Spanish economy. Tourism directly contributes 13% of Spain's entire GDP right now. That single sector is largely responsible for Spain's current economic growth, which is actually outstripping traditional powerhouses like France and Germany.
Foreign visitors bring external capital, which stimulates local businesses, generates tax revenue, and creates massive service sector employment. If you only look at the macroeconomic data, this looks like an absolute triumph for Madrid.
It looks like a triumph on a spreadsheet, but looking at the local sentiment, it reminds me of a company having its absolute best sales year ever, while the factory floor is completely melting down. A recent poll found 28% of Spaniards now have a negative view of foreign tourism. In Valencia, the tenants' union is reporting that landlords are ditching local wage metrics entirely. They were setting rent prices based on the salaries of visiting foreign tourists.
Which is aggressively pushing local residents out of their own neighborhoods. It has gotten so severe that Barcelona is planning to revoke all 10,000 of its short-term apartment licenses by 2028. They have also doubled the tourist tax for cruise arrivals, and the national government recently slapped Airbnb with a 65 million euro fine.
Here is my skepticism, though. If tourism is 13% of their GDP and it's the engine driving them past Germany, can local governments really afford to just pull the plug on 10,000 short-term rentals without tanking their own local economies?
You are identifying the severe consequences of imported inflation. This economic phenomenon occurs when foreign capital temporarily distorts a local market. It creates a massive unsustainable disconnect between local wages and the local cost of living. A worker earning a median wage in Valencia simply cannot compete for housing against a vacationer from London or New York who is willing to pay premium short-term rates. What you are seeing is the financialization of residential real estate.
I want to pause you right there because financialization of real estate sounds like textbook jargon. In layman's terms, that just means homes have stopped being places to live and have turned into high-yield stocks for investors.
An apartment is no longer valued based on what a local worker can pay to sleep there. It is valued based on its potential yield as a hospitality asset. When Barcelona threatens to revoke those 10,000 licenses, they are attempting a forced market correction. They are gambling that the loss in direct tourist revenue will be offset by stabilizing the housing market.
Retaining the local workforce and preventing the total hollowing out of the city's civic infrastructure. A city needs teachers, nurses, and service workers to function.
If those essential workers are priced out, the tourist infrastructure collapses anyway. And regarding that €65 million fine against Airbnb, it is less about the immediate financial penalty. That is just a fraction of the platform's global revenue. It is more about the state signaling authority over local zoning laws.
That breaking point in Spain happens when foreign capital floods a physical space. What happens when you have the exact opposite problem? What happens when the physical pathways themselves are intentionally destroyed to choke out an economy? That brings us to Russian-occupied Crimea, where the fuel shortages have reached a staggering level due to a total shift in Ukrainian drone strike tactics.
Back in May, strikes disabled 40% of Russia's primary oil refining capacity. Now the strategy has moved away from those massive refineries to the local distribution networks. They are picking off the trucks and the tankers.
The shift from targeting upstream production to targeting downstream distribution creates a highly effective logistical chokehold. Think of a refinery as the heart pumping the fuel and the distribution trucks as the capillaries delivering it to the extremities.
If you cannot stop the heart completely, you sever the capillaries. Analysts indicate there have been roughly 300 drone strikes since early May, specifically targeting trucks on the road from Rostov to Crimea via Mariupol. Ukraine has effectively neutralized the sea routes by taking out the ferries.
And the Kerch Bridge is currently too vulnerable for heavy fuel transport. That leaves a single coastal highway as the sole artery for an entire occupied peninsula.
The consumer impact of severing that artery is wild. We're seeing reports of 10-hour queues for gasoline. Most stations are strictly limiting purchases to 20 liters per person, and you can only secure that if you have a prepaid voucher.
One resident in Simferopol literally joked that he needs to buy a horse just to commute. There are also Russian tourists stranded there who arrived before the crisis escalated. The Moscow-installed authorities had to launch a special hotline just to help them escape. Moscow's energy ministry officially acknowledged these severe fuel difficulties just yesterday, on June 8th.
The blurring of military and civilian supply chains here is terrifying to think about. When a market's logistics are entirely bottlenecked onto one single coastal road, the destruction of a fuel tanker means both a military transport vehicle and a civilian commuter bus are left completely stranded.
That bottleneck illustrates the absolute fragility of a constrained supply chain under duress. Basic economics assumes goods will naturally flow to where demand is highest, but that requires physical, unimpeded pathways. When those pathways are systematically dismantled, currency loses its utility.
It does not matter how many rubles a stranded tourist or a military quartermaster possesses if the physical diesel simply does not exist in that geographic location. Furthermore, the reliance on a prepaid voucher system for those 20-liter rations is a classic wartime mechanism. It is designed to prevent hoarding and hyperinflation at the pump.
By removing the pricing mechanism from the open market and placing it under central control, the authorities are explicitly admitting a systemic logistical failure. It is a fascinating echo of historical trade blockades. Which, by the way, if you are curious about the long-term historical patterns behind these kinds of global sieges and supply chain tactics, you can find Financial Candy, Brain Candy, and classic audiobooks at clarinhoratio.com.
Looking at how these pathways function, we see destruction in Eastern Europe, but the exact opposite dynamic is playing out in North America. Opening next week on June 15th is the Gordie Howe International Bridge. This is a $4.7 billion six-lane physical link connecting Michigan and Ontario.
This infrastructure project is designed as a massive relief valve for cross-border commerce, particularly the auto manufacturing sector. The existing infrastructure, specifically the aging Ambassador Bridge, currently handles roughly a quarter of all trade between the U.S. and Canada. The modern automotive supply chain relies entirely on just-in-time manufacturing.
Let's unpack just-in-time for a second. That means a factory isn't hoarding a massive warehouse full of spare parts. They're relying on the trucks to arrive with the steering wheels exactly 2 hours before they are installed on the assembly line.
Parts cross the U.S.-Canada border multiple times before a vehicle is fully assembled. An engine block might be cast in Ontario, machined in Michigan, and installed back in Ontario. Therefore, a delay of even a few hours at a congested border crossing can idle an entire assembly plant, costing automakers millions of dollars a day.
The Gordie Howe Bridge adds essential redundancy and capacity to one of the most critical economic corridors on the planet. The political and financial history of this bridge is a story all its own, though. The project survived intense opposition from former President Trump, who argued it had virtually no U.S. content.
He claimed Canada treated the U.S. unfairly in trade. Despite that friction, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer pushed the project forward. But the financial structure is what really caught my eye. Canada and Michigan are sharing ownership of the bridge, but the toll revenue is going to be split only after Canada recovers its initial financial outlay.
Canada essentially front-loaded the massive capital risk, and they get to act as a toll booth until they are paid back in full.
How unusual is that kind of cross-border financial mechanism for a piece of shared public infrastructure?
It is highly unusual, but it perfectly reflects the asymmetrical economic stakes between the two nations. Canada's economy is far more dependent on exporting goods into the United States than the reverse. Securing a reliable modern trade route into the American Midwest was deemed a matter of supreme national economic security for Ottawa.
That existential need justified assuming the upfront capital risk. The Canadian government calculated that the long-term macroeconomic benefits of frictionless trade vastly outweigh the short-term financial burden of funding the construction. The toll agreement acts as a structured repayment vehicle.
Allowing the U.S. side to benefit from the infrastructure immediately while deferring their direct financial cost. That infrastructure agreement sits right in the middle of a ticking clock, too. The USMCA renegotiations are slated to end next month on July 1st. Tariff on Mexico are expected to remain in place, but Ottawa is aggressively pushing to renew the trade pact for another 16 years.
That physical bridge is essentially a $4.7 billion anchor tying the American and Canadian economies together right as those trade negotiations reach their deadline. And speaking of sharing the load to build a bridge, let's look at a massive digital infrastructure shift where a tech giant realized it couldn't build its new capabilities alone. Apple's recent WWDC announcements offered a massive pivot.
Apple revealed their generative AI strategy, branding it as Siri AI. The demonstration showed a more conversational interface that can understand on-screen context and draw on a user's personal data. However, the market reaction following the keynote was notably flat. The core reason for the muted investor response was the absence of what the industry calls agentic capabilities.
Siri AI can summarize an incoming text thread, but it cannot independently navigate a restaurant's website, cross-reference your calendar, and execute a dinner reservation without your direct intervention. Furthermore, the notable absence of incoming CEO John Turnus from the main presentation signaled to some analysts a potential lack of cohesive, forward-looking leadership regarding the actual rollout of these AI features.
The biggest financial twist from that presentation wasn't what the AI could do, but how it is powered behind the scenes. Apple is breaking from its long-standing strategy of using its own in-house silicon. They revealed that their most advanced model, AFM3 Cloud Pro, will actually run on NVIDIA processors and Google Cloud.
Their own private cloud compute simply cannot handle the sheer scale of complex reasoning required. It's as if the strictest walled garden in tech suddenly realized they have to buy their water and fertilizer from their biggest rivals. We spent a decade listening to Apple tout the superiority of their M-series chips, and now they are handing heavy compute duties over to NVIDIA.
Unsurprisingly, NVIDIA shares went up on the news, while Apple shares ticked slightly down.
Where is the actual money in this for Apple if they are outsourcing the core engine?
You are highlighting the strategic transition from hardware dominance to ecosystem monetization. Apple is conceding a crucial reality. They cannot win the raw compute arms race against specialized hardware companies like NVIDIA or massive cloud infrastructure providers like Google.
Apple's private cloud setup is meticulously optimized for user security and efficiency, not the brute force processing required to train and run frontier AI models. So the business strategy shifts to what analysts call the toll booth theory. Much like Canada building the physical bridge to collect tolls, Apple is building a digital bridge.
They might not own the server farms, but they own the most valuable real estate in the world, which is the consumer access point. There are over 2 billion active Apple devices globally.
They control the interface. So instead of spending tens of billions of dollars trying to catch up on building server hardware, they let Google and NVIDIA burn that capital. Apple just sits at the gate and takes a cut at the point of interaction.
If Apple allows third-party AI model makers to plug into their ecosystem, they can leverage their standard App Store model. They could take a percentage of third-party subscription fees or charge consumers directly for premium Apple Intelligence tiers. The existential risk for Apple, however, is commoditization.
If the underlying intelligence driving an iPhone is actually built by Google or OpenAI, Apple's hardware risks becoming nothing more than a beautiful, expensive vessel for someone else's product. The flat stock reaction indicates that the market is waiting for concrete proof that Apple can successfully monetize this service layer before assigning it a premium valuation.
Every story we looked at today proves that whether it is physical or digital infrastructure is not infinite. We looked at the physical capacity of Spanish housing, buckling under the weight of 100 million tourists, forcing local governments to choose between foreign capital and domestic stability.
We saw the constrained capacity of a single Crimean highway dictating the survival of a localized economy, reducing residents to 20-liter gas rations. We explored the expanded freight capacity over the Detroit River, where Canada paid $4.7 billion up front just to guarantee their physical access to the American market.
And we examined the compute capacity of Apple servers, proving that even the most valuable company on Earth can't build everything in-house. Markets always eventually hit a physical wall.
Scarcity forces adaptation. When those physical walls are hit, the cost of building a new bridge or the pain of failing to build one always trickles down to the individual consumer.
It leaves you wondering what happens when we hit the ultimate capacity limits.
If Spain's housing market is buckling under 100 million tourists seeking a safe haven today, what happens to global infrastructure over the next 2 decades when climate migration puts over 1 billion people on the move seeking permanent shelter? The friction we are seeing today might just be a preview of the physical walls to come. Thank you for joining us today to unpack these limits. The next time you see a massive number floating on a screen, remember to ask yourself where the physical friction is building up underneath it.